American college is a big-time sports. It's a pairing that is so deeply rooted in our culture, yet so unprecedented in other higher education systems around the world. The United States has its professional sports, but intercollegiate athletics just hit different, and it's pretty well documented why. That said, many people will say a foremost encapsulation of the feeling college sports gives you is in its unique soundtrack. Marching bands and college sports, that's another deeply rooted pairing, but it's one much less understood, and it's time to change that.
I was thinking about that, and it really goes way, way back. I mean, there have been bands that walked probably hundreds of years, town bands, police bands. I know in France, in the opera La Boheme in Act Two, there is a scene which is supposed to take place in the 1830s. There is a scene where a town band marches through on Christmas Eve in the cafe, and all the people travel along behind it. And then, of course, getting into sports and college sports, that's more like the last few years of the 1800s when that all got started, turn of the century generally.
The origin of marching band performance in general traces back to its functional use as military signaling, which goes back to ancient times. Its emergence at American colleges and universities comes from the post-Civil War emergence of on-campus military training programs, like ROTC, and the increasing popularity of piano marches throughout the public.
And so the marching style and music that was played at that time by marching bands in general was marches, okay? Because the function of the band was to provide music for the military training. So there were a lot of parades on campuses, and that was their function. They did a lot of parade marching. Now, Sousa marches were just beginning to appear at that time. So the other kinds of marches left over from the Civil War, for example. In the late 19th century, piano marches were all the rage. Everyone had a piano in their parlor. That's how you had live music in your house. You didn't have a radio or anything like that. And so someone played the piano, and so you played marches. Sousa made his money not from bands playing his marches, but from piano music. He made a fortune on that. So all of the Sousa marches that we enjoy also were published, maybe even first before the band version, as a piano piece. So that was the thing. So that was kind of that they played.
John Philip Sousa is a name that is synonymous with band music for a reason. His compositions brought that ubiquitous instrumental lineup to the forefront at the turn of the century, and his most popular genre was marches. This brought marching bands to the forefront of musical accompaniment to public festivities. While associations with military training explain the founding of most early college marching bands, one particular group formed in Ann Arbor, Michigan, was rather founded due to that need.
Looking at the Michigan band, when it finally did start in 1896, 97, of course, the first performance was in Washington's birthday, February 22nd, 1897. The band played marches. They were part of the Washington's birthday celebration, which was held every year. They bring a big speaker. The band finagled its way to get into the program. They weren't even on the stage or on the side on the floor. It was a small band. Now, popular music. About the same time that the Michigan band appears on the scene, a tune called A Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight became all the rage. It was the Taylor Swift song of the 1897s, okay? And so everyone wanted to play this. It became like the unofficial fight song of almost every university in the country at that time, including Michigan. And what they did, they would take the words of A Hot Time in the Old Town Tonight and would change the words to reflect your newspaper, the Michigan Daily, every Friday would publish a poem with words to that song, which would reflect the next day's opponent. So we're going to beat the Buckeyes, would be somehow thrown into it. And so that was the song. The time that the Michigan band appears on the scene, playing a well-known popular song that would be somewhat like a march, was not being incorporated into what they're playing.
As alluded to by the many alternate lyrics that were written in the college marching band scene for Hot Time, the Michigan marching band's founding also coalesced with the rise, of course, of college athletics. College marching bands and its sports teams began intertwining nationally around this time, but at Michigan, it was much more central to the founding of the organization. On March 27th, the MMB played at an indoor track meet. Notably, one of the runners was a young Louis Elbel, who would go on to write the victors a year later. They were at baseball games in the spring, a very popular spectator sport at the time. They even traveled to Detroit to play for track and baseball events there, parading up Jefferson to Woodward Avenues. But finally, on October 16th, the band would unite with the sport that it's held dear for 126 years: football.
I think a lot of the rise of the bands came with the rise of football to become the most popular sport. But we know that the Michigan band played for the baseball team. This is turn of the 20th century. It's part of the history of the Victors, one of the first times it was played. After Louis L. Bell wrote it in 1898, the band played it as the baseball team was at the train station leaving on a tour. I'm not sure there's as good documentation about pep bands sitting in the stands. It's the marching bands and the rise of football that has really grabbed the attention. It's the most visual, most obvious. Some people have called sports, the front door of the university, and sometimes the band can be the front door to the athletic department to the university.
That said, the Michigan Marching Band remained a student-run extracurricular. More structured faculty support and designated rehearsal space wouldn't come until President James Burrell Angel, infamous opponent of college football's growth, and the rest of the university administration began to open their minds towards the idea.
He and his predecessors saw the University of Michigan as another Harvard, an Eastern Ivy League type school, where music is maybe a secondary thing. Nice to have, but it's not a main function. And so that was the role. So again, with the starting of the band, certainly Angel was not against it, but he didn't see that as being a primary thing. And that was true of music in general. We had a school of music at that time. There was a private conservatory in town. If you know where the Nichols Arcade is, it was next door to that, on that side of the street, across from the parking structure. And this was a big building, and that was it. Of course, there always were students who were dual enrolled. They were enrolled in the private conservatory school of music and the University of Michigan. And so kind of an odd situations, but it would take a long time before finally we had a university administration which was accepting that. And then the same thing is true what you just said about sports and athletics.
Crucial to the early M&B's progress in the world of academia was student founder Harry DuPont, whose father Paul headed the university's French department and was a favorable voice among the university's leadership. Professor DuPont was also the one who eased early concerns from the athletic department on how the band's marching would affect the conditions of the gridiron. In addition to marching band history mirroring athletic history in terms of administrative relations, it also had its fair share of early powers in this innovative time. While football innovation spread westward from the Ivy League, the standards and growth of college marching bands spread from the Midwest outward, as Notre Dame laid its claim to being the first, and schools like Purdue and Illinois began to pioneer what we understand marching band as today.
Let's say 1900 as a year, Wisconsin had a 100-piece band. Michigan State, whatever college, whatever name it had back then, agricultural, whatever, they had like 80 to 90 in their band. Indiana had 100. That's where the name, the Fighting 100, came from. So all these schools had pretty big bands, and they were, doing more and more things. And again, as I was saying, it became a tradition to form a letter, a block I or whatever. And if there's anything fancy, someone just said, now you go here, you stand there, you stand there. Okay, that's an I. And maybe they came from a block band and marched into an I, and the crowd went crazy. And certainly the two leaders in the Midwest for all this was at Purdue and Illinois. Purdue, his last name was Emmerich. I can't think of his first name, but he was known as Spats Emmerich. That was his nickname. And maybe the first to really do kind of a showy type performance, like they were wearing bright spats. That's where the name came from. The Purdue band, they like gimmicks. So let's have like 30 glockenspiels out there playing. All right, so things like that. And we're doing maybe some pictures. That was the next big thing. Again, Purdue is one of the innovators of that. But and also Illinois and the legendary Albert Austin Harding, A.A. Harding, accumulated this massive band. and they were marching like 200 in the early 1900s. It was a very musical band. They had a strong military background with that, but also a strong band program. And the band program grew up independent of the School of Music. Harding also had a large concert band, which was the next innovation, to move from outdoor band to indoor band. Now, from the beginning, certainly the Michigan band was playing indoors, but it was just kind of a free-for-all. But at Illinois, they're playing Wagner and Mozart and Rossini and whatever, transcriptions. And A.A. Harding, set the tone. All band directors wanted to emulate what Illinois was doing, inside and outside. And so we had those two forces setting the stage. Illinois began to graduate its players from that band, and they went all over the country and spread the gospel of A.A. Harding, and they imitated the Illinois band. Everyone wanted to imitate the Illinois band.
As the ensemble that accompanied the winningest college football program of all of these schools, and an alumni base that was growing to be the world's largest, the Michigan Marching Band sought to build a program that reflected the excellence of its university and be innovators of their own. In 1915, the MMB gained its first faculty director in Captain Wilfred Wilson, who grew the band with the increasing backbone of public school band programs. Alongside the dedication of Michigan Stadium came Nicholas Falcone in 1927, who began to mold the band into a full symphonic program. His brother Leonard was also Michigan State University's most influential marching band director. On the marching band front, Falcone began Michigan's dive into formations, see Script Ohio in 1933, and specialized arrangements. But he, along with William D. Ravelli, an up-and-coming high school director in Indiana that caught the attention of Raymond Dvorak and other disciples of Illinois' A.A. Harding, becoming Falcone's successor after his tragic hearing loss forced retirement from Michigan, brought a notable change to the program.
We always say that Michigan did not grow out of the ROTC bands. Other bands began as military ROTC bands and then expanded. But we did have a component. The band, as I said, continued to exist during World War II, but just barely. And then after the war, when everything started to mushroom, to become more innovative, for a while, Dr. Ravelli did bring in an ROTC officer to, as he put it, teach the boys how to march. And we had that style for several years, that sort of stately marching style, 6 to 5, 6 steps to 5 yards. And then it wasn't until about 1950 that we changed and it became something more up-tempo, more athletic, faster, etc. That was right about 1950. Each band has its list of firsts. Probably some are disputed between bands, but Michigan has always had a long list. First band to employ an arranger to make special arrangements of music that would be appropriate on the football field, not just playing concert marches and transcriptions. Michigan band was the first to use an announcer as part of the presentation, sort of tie it together, a sort of ringmaster feel to it. We were the first band to travel to California for the Rose Bowl by train in those days, took a long time. We were the first band in more modern times to have a halftime show introduced from the International Space Station by a Michigan alum. We also had Beyonce introduce our show once. That's a long story, that whole connection. I'm not even sure of all the details, but there she was on the video board saying, my homies, the Michigan Marching Band, are about to do a show for you. It was all Beyonce music. A lot of things. Bands have, it's just so different than that military 6 to 5 marching up and down the field.
Just like college athletics, though, one piece of legislation had bigger magnitude than any other innovation: Title IX. Like the athletic department, band program administration at Michigan was resistant to admit women into the marching band specifically, but once the resources were provided, the success was undeniable.
I remember hearing probably the bander from either Ohio University or somewhere saying, when is Michigan going to smarten up and let women in the band? We thought, well, that will never happen. It's the marching men of Michigan. Even our cheerleaders were all male. Now, at this point, some schools did have women cheerleaders, not Michigan. This might sound really crazy, but at the time, It just never occurred to anyone that it would be that way. But then when it happened at the university level, it was already happening in high schools. And so I think people were a little bit more accepting than they would have been in the earlier 60s than that. And the effect it had on the band was it just blossomed the numbers. Okay, more people. So they came. In Dr. Billy's last year, I would say 80% of that marching band was music major.
Very
And only
different.
yes, and about 20%, maybe, or at the most 30, all right, but not even that, I would think, were non-music majors. And of course, they were all male. And we were scrambling sometimes to get enough people to be in that band. When women started coming to the band, that's when the explosion happened. But when it happened, and by this point I'm teaching, and I could see it's the most natural thing in the world, you know, it wasn't a big deal when it happened, I think, to the students. I think by that point, everyone realized that this is how it's going to be, but no one expected the explosion. So by the second year of that, like 1974-ish, remember George Cavender at the Midwestern Music Conference, which used to be in Ann Arbor. All the music teachers from Michigan would come to Ann Arbor in January in a panel about marching band. So it says, the greatest thing ever happened to the Michigan marching band was having women in the band. It has just changed everything for the better, because we're having a discussion about this. And as we know, he wasn't really, he was not encouraging to the women. It changed his heart, if you want to say it that way. And I think the proof of that was he had, like around 1975, 76, he had two women as the first two trumpet players. Okay, so the most esteemed maybe position in the whole band, maybe, and he was all for them. Now, he never said, I'm sorry for what he did. And in the Big Ten, Michigan wasn't the only one to have blockades for and have women in the band. You could look at Michigan State, Illinois, all of them. They all sinned. They all had narrow vision. Not a one of them was a leader. Once George realized that this is how it's going to be, he changed his mind and he went with it with force. Actually, we're going to a school and we'll talk to schools saying, you know, we're looking for not just men, but we want to look at the girls. There's a place for you in the marching band too. So, I mean, but it was a slow go everywhere. I remember in 1972 at homecoming, I was sitting next to George after the game and Florence Cavender. And I mentioned that this is really something to see women in the marching band. And George was sitting there eating a donut or something afterwards. And his wife said, he looked at George and says, you dumb, you should have done that years ago. And he looked down and he says, you're right. So it was all a good thing.
Ladies and gentlemen, introducing the world's greatest band, the 400-member Michigan Marching Band. And take
alongside all of these innovations among leaders and best of the marching band world continues the relationship between those ensembles and the teams they support. Many schools have even athletic department overseen marching bands, but at Michigan, the separation between athletics and SMTD has led to unique results over the years.
Ravelli liked sports. First of all, he met the athletic people the wrong way. Around 1937-ish, it was the Ohio State game, and the band spelled Buckeye, B-U-C-K-I, the letter I. And somehow he arranged that the I, when it was Buck and I, and then the I moved up and it's spelled Buick. Because Buick was starting to sponsor the Michigan band. The next morning, Fielding H. Yost was at Ravelli's doorstep, early morning on a Sunday, saying, young man, never do that again.
The no advertising in the Big House rule applied to the MMB too, but under the father of modern athletic directors, the band was essential to promoting sports, and his goal of carpeting that hole that Yost dug and Chrysler paid for.
The very first band day at Michigan started right around 1950. Invite high school bands to that first game, and it was part of the reasoning behind that was so that the band didn't have to rush to present a whole pregame and halftime that very first week of school. The school used to start later and the season used to start later. I still remember my first game announcing for the band. It was 1970, and traditionally the first game of the season was band day. And my script said, our 14,000 high school bandsmen from all parts of the state of Michigan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That had to stop when Michigan started getting more people to come to the games. I remember when the streak began of 100,000 at a game. It was Purdue, the next to last home game in 1975, and they announced the attendance, and everybody was sort of surprised. 100,000 today. Usually that only happened for Michigan State or Ohio State. And so suddenly the athletic department is faced with, if we give away 14,000 seats for band day, that's 14,000 season tickets we can't sell. We tried to bring it back a little bit by bringing in other teams to play, smaller teams. You know, Michigan's relationship or connection with Slippery Rock. And that first year, it was around 1979 or 80. I think we brought in Slippery Rock and one of their opponents, and they played in Michigan Stadium. And then, of course, we had a high school band day to go along with it. It was fun, too.
The relationship between Michigan's athletics and marching band continues to be unique among its counterparts around the country, and the foremost example of that is the very existence of one of my interview subjects, Carl Grapentine.
But then officially, since 2006, I've been the stadium announcer, the game announcer, and there are not many people who do that. At one time, the Penn State announcer and I thought we were maybe the only two, at least among big-time college sports, that did both band and the games. He came about it the same way, started as band announcer, became game announcer, and but he is no longer there. Peter Clay at Michigan State is now doing double duty. So it's just seems just to be the state of Michigan now. Peter and I do the games and the bands as well.
There you have it, the connection between marching bands and college sports. We examined how the two first got intertwined, their similarities in their early beginnings, administrative immobility, early regional innovators, the effects of military training, how Michigan fits into that picture, the transformation due to Title IX, and how relationships between athletic departments and marching band programs persist. Thank you so much for watching the soundtrack of college athletics.